Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Quigley on Divorce, a behind-the-scenes look. I'm your host, James Quigley, and today I am joined by a very, very special guest, John Swift. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about John in just a minute. But what's interesting is today's conversation is dealing with money in your marriage, money in divorce. And this is going to be something that, as we came up with the idea and started talking about this, I think this is such a broad topic that it's going to lead into a much broader, maybe even a multi-part series in terms of these podcasts. Yeah. So, John, welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about John Swift. I've known John for some time. John and I share a mutual friendship with a former associate attorney of our office here, Charlie Phillips. And Charlie is in the insurance world. And so Charlie and John, as you know, the financial world with insurance and wealth management, have crossed paths, and certainly those are things we deal with. They tangentially touch on everything we do as divorce lawyers. But let me just I want to be very specific because John's background is quite impressive, and I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And of course, as I'm going through this,
it's the one page. There you are.
All right, there we go. So just a little bit about John. So John's been in wealth management for more than 34 years. So a lot of experience, even more than I've been practicing in my 27 years as a divorce lawyer. Started his career as an investment analyst and a portfolio manager in a large Wall Street law firm, Neuberger Beermann, a very respected firm that John was at, but has worked in the world of consulting, pension consulting. By the way, you're also CPA, true?
Yes.
Okay, so that's also really an interesting piece to wealth management, is having that tax understanding and background. Right. But currently has his own practice. And John, what's the name of your firm?
It's Benchmark Investment Advisors.
Okay.
Located here in Chicago. Yeah. We have offices up in Milwaukee, down in St. Louis, and in Cincinnati. So kind of a regional firm, but headquartered here in Chicago.
Having done the big Wall Street firms and the big wealth management firms, is it fair to say what your firm now is sort of a boutique wealth management firm?
We do. We are a boutique in the sense that we're not one of the huge manager, but we provide a holistic kind of financial planning as well as investment management to our clients. So everybody starts off with a financial plan, as you know.
Yeah.
And we understand their assets, their liabilities, their incomes, their goals and objectives in life. And that really decides where we're going to go with their investments and how to manage those. Okay. So the financial plan is an important piece of that. So we're part financial planner and part investment advisor. Awesome. The investments are all done in-house. What that means to our clients is that we cut out that kind of middleman, mutual fund, the exchange-traded funds, and the fees associated with those things. So we manage with individual equities, individual bonds, and what that means to our clients is a lot lower cost of ownership of those securities. Yeah. And it helps us do a much better job at year-end in terms of taxes. You mentioned the CPA. Mm-hmm. It's not what you earn, it's what you keep. Right. So we're very, very attuned to that. And having an individual stocks, bonds, and in the portfolio allows us to do a much better job in terms of effectuating a better tax result.
Yeah. And having been in the big shop, been there, done that, you've realized that the best way you can service your client is more in this boutique fashion, right. More individualized care for your clients.
Right. The big brokerage firms and so forth, I had an axe to grind coming into the relationship. We had products to sell. Being independent allows me to put in place, the best equities and best bonds for that client, not necessarily what we had basically pre-cooked for them.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what interested me in having you be part of this podcast, because, in what you do with individuals, you can really tailor specific plans to the specific needs of the individual and their family. And as such, you've worked with a number of families, both perhaps the wage earner in a situation, as well as an individual in a divorce who may not have the financial savvy, maybe not have the experience. And so that gives you a unique perspective in terms of people in a divorce, going into a divorce, or even coming out of a divorce.
Right. We've seen all sorts of people on either side. and helped out both sides, in the divorce, the kind of non-financial partner, I guess we can call it, as well as a financial partner. So very different issues, and we've helped through many of them effectuate the best result for the family in total.
Yeah.
I always tell them that when they get into the divorce, it's a situation where you want to be fair, open, transparent. I've seen these things go off the rails where the people want to be punitive, and that ultimately doesn't do anybody any good. Said, look, we need to be open and transparent and fair right from the get-go, and I've seen that result in much less contentious divorces, and where you can move on. Many of these where it's just the partners have basically become very different people, and no fault of anybody. And the last thing they want to do is have a very contentious divorce where guys like you get very rich.
And that's a fair point because, and I'll tell my clients, paying a divorce lawyer, it's almost like insurance. You need it. You need to make sure things are done right.
Right.
But fighting in a contentious divorce isn't a good investment.
Right.
Take your money, give it to John. John will invest your money. And what's interesting, I think, about what you were just saying and resonates to me is you're obviously a smart guy. I know you to be that. You know what you're doing with wealth management.
Right.
But to me, what's important for people in a divorce or coming out of a divorce is having somebody that has more of a broader look than, hey, I just want to take your dollars and cents.
Right.
You talked about being transparent and not having a contentious divorce. A lot of people I've come into in your industry, for example, they're not as concerned about that. They want to know,
what are the dollars and cents?
Absolutely. You're bringing $5 million to me, $10 million to me.
Yeah.
I'll invest it. I'll make money off for them and for myself. But I'm less interested in, the broader picture of their families and how much they're paying attorneys. But that's something you focus on as well.
Right. I tell people, having been on both sides with both partners or both divorcing spouses, look at, what do you want your kids to say about the divorce?
Yeah.
What do you want to tell other people about the divorce? And what are they going to see? Are they going to see something very contentious or something that was very amicable?
Sure.
Obviously, for the betterment of your family, especially when kids are involved, you want this to be as smooth as possible.
Yeah.
It's going to be stressful. It is a divorce after you are basically leaving a relationship. So there's going to be a certain amount of stress. We don't want to add to that by having financial stress. So we want to be transparent in the sense that be fair up front, and where the other non-financial partner looks at it and goes, well, that's incredibly fair.
Yeah.
And let's move forward.
Yeah.
As opposed to he's trying to hide or she's trying to hide something from me.
Well, and that's such great advice, particularly if you have one party to the divorce that understands where the assets are and how they're held. We get in cases sometimes where people, I don't know if it's bad advice or they've seen something on the internet or TV, they think they can hide something, they think they can be slick.
Yeah, right.
When you try to play those games, honestly, what that does for divorce lawyers is it starts the meter running, because now we got to follow this path. And by the way, everything in this day and age is traceable to some extent. It might take a little while and we got to figure out from here to there. We're going to figure that out.
Right.
So being transparent and honest and say, here's what we have, here's how it's held, as a starting premise, it's going to make things so much easier in the entire process.
Right. Ultimately, as you said, Jim, you're going to find out. Then the court of law basically say that was a fraudulent conveyance, and they don't treat that particular person very well in divorce. That's when things go very poor for that side of the equation. So, be truthful, be honest, be open. This is the man or woman that you fell in love with and married years ago, and was the mother or father of your children, and so you treat them basically with respect. And the most loving thing you could do is to end well.
Yeah, and that's a great message. End well, hard to do, like you said before, a lot of emotion. Let me kind of transition into sort of comparing and contrasting, working with an individual who's going through a divorce on the side of not understanding money, maybe isn't the one paying the bills, maybe hasn't established a credit history even during the marriage, because credit cards are all in the other spouse's name, cars are all in the other spouse's name.
Right.
What are some of the things during a divorce that you're going to want to help someone in that position with? How do you guide them to a better understanding?
Well, first you have to create for yourself, even within a marriage, and any partner, even in a great marriage, needs to establish a financial identity for themselves, independent, and also as a household, but also independent.
What do you mean by establish a financial identity?
You have your own credit card. You might have a credit card that's in the name of both of you. You might have some investment accounts or other things that are held jointly with you and your husband or wife. But you also need bank accounts that might be in your name, a credit card that might be in your name, to create your own credit history that you get a credit score. Because ultimately, once you're on your own, and if you haven't created that financial credit score, go out and try and find a mortgage. You had a podcast recently on mortgages, which is great. And I would tell your listeners and your viewers to go back and review that. Yeah. Fantastic, but it'd be very difficult without that credit history and that credit identity to go out and get a mortgage.
Yeah, and let me sort of piggyback on that from a divorce lawyer's perspective, because I come from it that having that financial identity a little different, because I look at it from my ability to help protect a spouse who might not be the wage earner, might not be in control of the assets going into a divorce that might be contentious, and they're worried about what if he or she cuts me off? Yeah. How am I going to pay the bills? And candidly, the court system is not built for speed. And so they typically do not treat financial issues as emergencies. So it's not like if one spouse cuts off the other, I can run into court the next day and judge say, oh, we're going to conduct a hearing and you're going to get all kinds of money. It doesn't work that way. There's time to respond. I have to deal with the judge's schedule. And so I look at that also saying, you know what, at least if you have a credit card in your name, if the car is titled in your name, if you have a bank account where some money, and again, I'm not advocating for not having joint accounts in a marriage at all. No. In fact, I have it in mine.
Absolutely.
But having something to where if it's going to take some time legally for me to establish either a temporary maintenance or child support or allocation of assets during the proceedings, you've got something to fall back on. You've got some protection. You're not beholden to that other spouse.
Right. You've got your own separate account you perhaps have been putting money into. Maybe you've decided that on the joint account, we're going to basically split that amicably in half or whatever's fair to seed the account for the basically non-financial partner, let's say. We talk about, I was in a situation recently where I was hired as the financial advisor to the non-financial spouse. Okay. And we worked through creating this identity for this spouse. And also it was important for happened to be a woman in this particular case that she have a separate or pre-experienced what it was going to be like living as a separate person.
Paying her own bills.
Paying her own bills, having her own credit history. Is the budget sufficient to basically fund this life? And we created a complete financial plan for her. Not only just with the ongoing maintenance of the home, what is the home going to look like, but also the children's education as well as her own retirement someday. Yeah. So that I think is the important component. We started with the non-financial partner to get that person a certain comfort level with respect to their finances.
Yeah, and this is something John and I actually offline had talked about this, something where we understand this when during a divorce, and I say, John, I've got the non-financial spouse, in good term, maybe doesn't fully understand what, life after divorce is going to look like financially. And one of the things that we both talk about, which is really important, is understanding, knowing how to do that's important, knowing what's available, but also being realistic. Because I've had individuals come to me and they say, well, wait a minute. I heard somewhere, I read on the internet, right, the answer to everything, that I get to live the standard of living I enjoyed during the marriage. Isn't that true? And it's so everyone understands, let's be really clear on this. Here in Illinois, that can be a component of the maintenance award. In other words, the court can consider outside of the formula in very limited certain circumstances the standard of living that the individual enjoyed during the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But I can assure you, most of my clients do not come out of a divorce living the same standard of living. They can't afford the same, because you have the same wage earner, you have the same assets, and now you've got two households, and we're splitting up those assets. It's a different optic. So there's almost a reality check that's very hard for some people in that in that context to really understand coming out of a divorce.
Yeah, I see a lot. I mean, I'm in the financial planning and investment advisory business, and we are bad at doing this if we don't do it with a lot of cases, because we were probably perpetrating, the impression that they should have the same lifestyle that they had, pre-divorce. And like you indicated, divorce, it's a split of the assets and the income, but there's a lot of times there's going to be, some frictional loss, if you will. And it goes well beyond, paying their attorney fees and so forth, but it's a time spent during the divorce. That's going to be a time where you perhaps are spending other time that you would have spent at your business, basically working through the process of divorce. So in working with the non-financial spouse, it's what's reasonable, what is, and what is it going to look like once the divorce is final, which gives them the confidence come day one, when those papers are finally executed and fully in place, that they aren't starting off day one going, well, now what?
What do I do?
What do I do? How do I work my financial life? I feel unprepared. They have the confidence going into it that they can survive and do quite well, relative. They may not live in the $3 million house anymore, but they live in a very nice house.
Sure.
And they become comfortable with what life is going to look like post-divorce. Yeah.
And I think that's something, we've done, is when we get to a point when me on the divorce side, having a pretty clear picture of where things are going to be. And I can say to you, John, our non-financial spouse in this case is going to have $10,000 net per month in a maintenance package, and it's going to extend for this period of time. That individual is going to come out with, $1.4 million in retirement. We're liquidating some real estate, and there's some stock. And so that, total package combined, there's going to be $3 to $5 million of assets. Okay, now with that as kind of a projection, puts you in a little better position to sit with our client and model a little bit for that individual affordability. Here's why you might not want to stay in that $3 million house, because not only is there a mortgage, but there's taxes, and we have to pay the landscaper and the gardener, and by the way, the roof is getting kind of old. So at that point in time, we've had some success with you sitting down and saying, here's what it looks like, and you'll be okay.
Right. Yeah, the big part of any personal financial set of financial statements is really the budget. Let's understand what the budget looks like. For many folks that I've worked with in the past, going through a divorce, as a household, they didn't budget. And the budget process may be foreign to them, but once they've gone through it, it's liberating. And it's a sense that I can do this. I've had people that are just awestruck. I can't spend anything. Well, if it's in the budget, feel free to go on that trip, because it's well within what you can afford. Affordability, right sizing to what they have post-divorce is first step in the budget.
Being realistic with the budget. I think that's one of the hardest things. And again, it's always not sounding sexist, because there's always someone on either side of this. But as an example, have a homemaker and a mother. She's raised 3 children, been married 22 years. Husband's been the wage earner. He's worked, with a wealth advisor in terms of their investments during the marriage. Had a really nice life, but I'm getting kids to soccer practice and basketball practice, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Here I am after 22 years. I don't really fully understand really what we have or what I'm going to be able to afford. And then they have the emotion comes in.
Yeah.
We've been in this house, and I decorated this house, and this is where the kids grew up. And, I want to keep the house. And that's where sometimes these conversations are difficult for me, for
Right.
you,
Right.
where we're saying, understand that, and that's a reasonable emotional process to go through. But here's why it might not make sense economically
Yeah.
to stay tethered to that house. And here's a brighter outlook, and that's a conversation we have to have. And it's a hard conversation to have.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I think that any person in a divorce needs a financial advisor, as well as, of course, an attorney. But a financial advisor will be able to independently and with an unbiased eye look at the situation and say, in dollars and cents, in black and white, what is affordable, and help them through that emotional, not only leaving the house that they grew up in, but understanding that, look, at now there's one less person that's going to be living in that house, and maybe that house is not right sized to the life that you're going to lead post divorce. So we've worked through those issues, and we can do that in a very non-emotional way, of course, with somebody that is a financial advisor that's outside of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So not only works with the budgeting process, but also in the looking at not being emotional about your finances within the divorce. Nobody wins when it gets contentious.
Yeah.
And somebody who can, with a very independent eye, say that this is reasonable, what they're proposing is reasonable and equitable, and don't use finances as being punitive in terms of, you're leaving me after 22 years, I'm going to make you pay.
Yeah. Because everybody loses.
Everybody loses there.
Yep.
There's I've not had one situation where one person walks away and says, I really got him or her.
It's a waste. Yeah.
It is.
I mean, I tell people, what you're spending, paying legal fees, can be the tuition for 3 children to go through college. You think about that. And people spend that kind of wealth doing it.
Yeah.
It's another thing too, and we've talked about this, is when you sit with individuals going through that process, your eye is not only towards setting a budget to pay these expenses, but again, your objective in working with that individual is also on a broader picture saying, you're 49 years old. Okay. You've been out of the workforce for these 22 years or 15 of the 22 years, whatever it is. Where do you want to be when you're 62, 72, and so on and so forth? Right. One of your children's a daughter and you want to pay for that wedding and some of these things. So also coming up with a broader plan to where we're not just on a monthly basis making ends meet, right, and every dollar that comes in goes out, but also creating a larger picture plan so that they have security in the future.
And confidence in the future. That's what a financial plan should provide. Not only that I'm meeting my current expenses, but I'm saving money for these major goals and objectives of the weddings that are coming up, perhaps a vacation home or vacations, down the road, and importantly, in retirement. They may want to go back to work. The kids are out of college, and they have a desire to go back and into the workforce. Maybe not. But the financial plan should not only just currently show them and give them confidence that they can make ends meet, but importantly, down the road, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah. And that's in that conversation I've found to be difficult, and I know you have as well, in terms of, to get there, here's what you got. And again, and I've struggled with this in my practice from time to time, where people will go to somebody refers them to somebody. I don't have the ability to say, go talk to John, who understands their finances in the context of a divorce. And then that individual says to him, here's what you need. And they've got this false expectation that they're entitled to that, when the law doesn't provide that. So sometimes the conversation also evolves into, you can make ends meet on this kind of a budget, but for you really to have that confidence and to be comfortable, re-entering the workforce may be part of that conversation. Sure. Because there may not be enough wealth, or there may not be enough income in a marriage that when it's divided up, one can, and this goes back to that standard of living, I can't stay at home without supplementing my income. So that also sometimes is part of a discussion you'll have in terms of how this is what you got and this is what we can do with that.
Right.
But if you had this additional amount coming in, that can also add into the plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Had a situation recently where we did the financial plan for the non-financial spouse, and it was going to be, she was going to be fine if a lot of things went right.
Yeah.
So, but what if? So we would do the what if scenarios within any financial plan. You kind of do the scenario testing, and what if, all of these projections don't kind of go, go on the downside.
Yeah.
She came to the conclusion that she's going to need to work, but was very surprised and happy to find out that it was about 5 years of income, and that's it. That would give her that margin of safety, let's call it, and made her feel a lot more comfortable, and made her feel a lot better the fact that she was going to have to work for the next 20 years.
Right.
That it was a very finite, fairly short period of time, and was absolutely happy to go back and do that.
Yeah, interesting. And I want to spend a little bit more time. I know we're getting kind of toward the end of this episode, but you've had experience with sort of the other side, where you have someone whose money you've been managing, and they're looking at it maybe saying, wow, I had a plan at this point in my life. I thought I only had to work X number of years and I've got this to rely on, and now half of that or some percentage of that, it's gone. I understand it's what the law is. I got to do it. How do you manage those situations with individuals in that context?
Well, you have to set up expectations. Had a situation where a longtime client of mine went through a divorce, saw that his assets, half of them were going to go away. A big part of his retirement plan, some of his taxable investments were going away. And his first comment to me was like, I'm worth half of what I was before. The first thing I said back to him, I said, no, you're worth exactly what you were worth before, because those were as much your wife's assets than they were yours. But recently, after a couple of years, we made it back for him. And now he got to the point where he has enough of what he originally considered his assets. And he was worth as much as he was pre-divorce. And that was a big point of celebration for himself, I think, at least emotionally. But what we can do with the person who was the breadwinner is to understand and set reasonable expectations.
Yeah. And I think that, to me, when you talk about what I try to do as a divorce lawyer and what you do in wealth planning for individuals, reasonable expectations. That is, and again, that's an objective point of view we bring to people in this process. But because of the emotional component, it's sometimes hard to reconcile one's emotional expectation with what we're saying legally or financially is reasonable. And so I think we just have to continue to beat that drum with individuals in terms of, and not buy into a false expectation. I think it's the worst thing you can do. It'd be the equivalent, I think, of you saying to someone, here, give me your money, I'm going to get you a 20% return on your money for the rest of your life. Just not going to happen. I mean, and there are probably people, maybe that's a little, outlandish, but there are people who practice in your world setting false expectations. And I think that's really, that type of narrative to an individual, especially vulnerable in a divorce, can really, really be devastating for people.
I think what resonated with this gentleman that I was speaking of, too, is being transparent, open, fair throughout, is how do you want your children to think about what you're going through? They had teenage children involved, obviously very attuned to what was going on between mom and dad. What do you want them to think about how you exited this marriage? And you're going to do that primarily on how equitable you're being during the process, how fair, and how non-contentious you're going to be with your former spouse through this process. And you're going to have a much better impression with the children, most importantly, but also out in the public.
Yeah, that's really an interesting perspective. And again, that's part of why I enjoy working with John. It's more than just dollars and cents, and we try to bring that same concept as divorce lawyers. That you mentioned before, I thought that was interesting. You said the gentleman that you worked with was concerned about, I'm not worth as much as I was. How do you define what you're worth? How do your children define what you're worth? I think, in large part, many kids whose parents get divorced, they're less concerned whether they have a certain amount of money as, does mom still respect dad and dad mom, even though they went through this process? How do they conduct themselves? How do they either include us or shelter us from this process? I think to me, there's a lot more value than that, than any rate of return on any investment.
Yeah, your worth to your children is always your time, as opposed to it's much beyond dollars and cents.
Yeah. And I want to just sort of echoing what you said about, I don't remember the word you put to it, but that concept of, for an individual who is the wage earner, maybe a business owner, we represent a lot of business owners,
Sure.
is the value of peace of mind in terms of I can go to my office and I can focus and I can be productive.
Yeah.
We see that a lot in divorce, where it's a tremendous distraction and can be very devastating financially to people's business and to their jobs. Sometimes people lose jobs because, hey, I'm in court all the time and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. So keeping them focused, getting through the process, another big part of that financially.
Absolutely. You want to treat other people as you would like to be treated.
Yeah.
And it's true in divorce as it is every day.
Yeah. And that's an awesome message on which to close. Like I said, this is your money in your marriage, and then, coincidentally, your money in a divorce is a very broad conversation, and one that we're going to continue. John Swift, if somebody says, listen, I'm in a tough process, or even if I'm not going through divorce and I've got some earnings and wealth and I just need some advice, how does someone get in touch with you?
Well, they can either go to our website at www.trustbenchmark.com or contact me directly. Here in town, my email is jswift@trustbenchmark.com or at my telephone number, 312-259-9595. We'll get into my office.
Awesome. John, appreciate you coming in. Thanks for the advice. All right.
You're quite welcome.
Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And as always, you can always, if you have questions regarding finances in a divorce, you always can contact us here at Beermann. Again, James Quigley on Divorce, a behind the scenes look. Thanks.